We have 1 minute to start. We are sharing the link of the video that is live.
I don't have a PowerPoint. I hope that's all right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay, ma'am.
Sunil, maybe you can start now.
Okay. Okay, we are going to start. Professor Amita Batra and dear participants, Namaste and good afternoon. Welcome to the NICE Economic Lecture Series. Through NICE Economic Lecture Series, we aim to invite eminent economists to discuss the contemporary economic issues at the time when the world is struggling with post-COVID recovery, which has further been hit by Russia-Ukraine crisis. Before we start, let me briefly introduce NICE. Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is a research think tank registered under the Companies Act 2006 of Nepal, working towards bringing in research excellence in the field of international relations, international economy, security, and development, and looking for better approaches for enhanced international cooperation and relations for a better, peaceful, and stable world. To talk about today's important topic, post-COVID-19 regional economic integration in South Asia, we have Professor Amita Batra. Dr. Amita Batra is a professor of economics and is currently the chairperson of the Center for South Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Professor Batra was senior visiting fellow at the Department of Political Economy, School of Social Science and Political Sciences, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at University of Sydney in October 2018. She is a member of the advisory group of G20 Finance Track 2022 to 23, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Professor Batra has written and published extensively on trade policy issues, and her latest book, India's Trade Policy in the 21st Century, is forthcoming. Dr. Batra has a PhD in economics from the Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi, India. Her areas of expertise include international trade and finance, regional economic integration, with a special focus on South Asia and Asia, gravity model, trade and conflict, time series modeling. Professor Batra, you have around 30 to 35 minutes to make your initial remarks, which will be followed by the questions and answers. And this session will be of 45 to 60 minutes, and the program is streaming live on several Facebook pages and social media platforms. We would like to request all our participants to tweet about the event and also share on our live video on their social media so that maximum can benefit from the discussion. The audience can drop their questions under Facebook Live or in Zoom chat. Professor Batra, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sunil, and thank you for this opportunity to NICE to have given me this platform today to be able to express my views on the subject that has been very close to my heart for a very long time now, both in terms of what I teach as well as what I'm doing my research on, As far as economic integration, regional economic integration in South Asia is concerned, being in South Asia, I think this is an issue and subject that's of importance and relevance for all of us, And while many of us, have been looking at this particular aspect for a very long time, and I think the starting point for all of us, whether we go on to teach or whether we go on to conferences, discussions on South Asia, is that South Asia is the least integrated region. That's one in the world. And two, that South Asia, economic integration in South Asia in terms of the predominant parameter that is intra-regional trade has been now stagnant for many years and decades, That is, intra-regional trade in South Asia remains between 5 to 6%, irrespective of the fact that we've had in the region a preferential trading arrangement from the 1990s, as well as a free trade area agreement, in the 2000s, But before I go on to the details of, the process as far as the trade agreements are concerned, I think I'd like to briefly talk about the current situation and the topic that is the topic of the day, that is economic integration in the post-pandemic era in South Asia. And, highlight some of the aspects of the pandemic itself that make it very important in the current context for South Asia to rethink its approach as far as economic integration in the region is concerned, And I say this for a number of reasons, which I will discuss. The first, of course, as has also been mentioned by, in the introduction, that it's not just the pandemic that we've been hit by in the last 2 years, but there has also been in the recent year, in the last 1 year, in 2022, that we've seen the Ukraine crisis, I'd go back a little more to say, that, over time, we have been looking at, to a certain extent, in the context of trade, a dilution of the multilateral forum also, that is the WTO in terms of regulating global trade, how these three factors or how these three events, or developments come together to make economic integration within a region more important, I'll start with that, In the first place, of course, the fact that, the WTO itself, this is right from the post, ever since the Doha Development Agenda in the last 2 decades that we've been looking at the multilateral forum, we've seen it to underperform in terms of the objectives of the WTO in terms of expanding trade on a free and fair basis. Increasingly, we've seen, the many items on the Doha Development Agenda that were in the interest of the developing countries to have not been either accepted or being not resolved, at the forum. And there being a constant kind of a distinction, between what the developed world has wanted, in terms of sectors like agriculture, non-agricultural market access, services liberalization, and manufacturing sector access, in developing countries, The emphasis of the developing countries, given their kind of interests and their livelihood concerns, having been more on agriculture, in terms of the differential approach to agriculture that must prevail in the multilateral forum, to be able to separate when talking about subsidies between the livelihood concern related issues in the developing country agricultural sector, subsidies by the developing countries, and subsidies that are provided by the developed world. There have also been other issues related to market access, as we say, in terms of tariffs, protectionism to a certain extent, and in terms of services liberalization, seeking, movement of professionals from the developing world to the developed world, which has been opposed, All of this saw the decline in the WTO in terms of being able to come to a resolution on any of these issues. This, of course, towards the end of the last decade, has been followed by a complete violation of the norms of the WTO by the United States when it imposed tariffs bilaterally on Chinese imports, So in that sense, a complete violation of the rules of the WTO led to a further erosion of the WTO, the multilateral forum, And all of this in the last 2 decades has meant that, the regional forums or the regional trade agreements, in bringing together regions for the purpose of economic, integration, or taking forward the idea of trade and manufacturing has been really the mode of trade happening around the world. That is, trade has happened less through the multilateral forum in the last 2.5 decades that we've seen across the world, and more through the regional trading agreements, more through regional trading arrangements, These have become the primary mode as far as trade across the world in the last 2 decades is concerned, So that's one part of it where we see that in the last 2 decades, the developments have been more in line with regionalism, than with multilateralism, The importance of regionalism that has seen an increase, in the last 2 decades. This, in the sense of when we talk about the last couple of years, of the last decade with US-China trade war and trade tensions, increasing the importance of regionalism even more, was followed by the pandemic, I mean, out of the blue, unforeseen, unpredictable, uncertain times that have descended upon us, through the pandemic, and which again has made it very significant as far as regionalism is concerned. I mean, although pandemic has also been very significant in bringing up the importance of cooperation across the world, whether it was vaccines, vaccine technology, passing on vaccine technology, etc., food, medical equipment, all of that required greater cooperation among people, But we also saw globally many faltering as far as sharing of technology was concerned. For example, the WTO was not able to rise to the occasion when it came to sharing the technology for vaccine production. EU had its own rules and regulations in terms of being highly protective as far as its technology was concerned. Many countries imposed export restrictions and barriers on food items. Many countries imposed restrictions and barriers, even as far as the medical equipment was concerned. It's only over time that some of these were relaxed, some were taken off, but the pandemic did see an increase in trade barriers specific to certain sectors, critical sectors during that time. Again, the importance of regionalism, proximity, closer that the economies were, greater the need to come to help for each other, Regional cooperation and regional integration, saw again an importance that was to the fore or brought to the fore by the necessities of the pandemic, On top of the pandemic, we have seen, the Ukraine crisis, a third event, again, that has been completely unforeseen, a completely unpredictable event, that has lent or that has contributed even greater uncertainty to the world and global conditions, And this uncertainty, that has been cumulative upon the earlier uncertainties, and earlier, in a sense, the greater importance of economic integration in the region and lesser performing multilateral institutions, the Ukraine crisis has brought that to the fore once again, The fact that because of the Ukraine crisis globally, there have been consequences in terms of disruptions as far as value chains are concerned. There has been disruptions or clogging as far as trade routes are concerned. Many of these trade routes that were very significant, in terms of major items, Again, major items as far as day-to-day living is concerned. Food items, fuel, oil, for example, The geopolitical consequences of the Ukraine crisis has meant that there is now food and fuel inflation that we see across the world because of the shortages that have been imposed upon the situation that was already with us as a consequence of the pandemic, In addition, what is it that we've seen, as far as the Ukraine crisis is concerned, and the prior, expansionary fiscal policies, fiscal stimuli that was given on the, as a consequence of the pandemic by many developed countries, is the rise of inflationary forces across the world. Change as far as external sector is concerned, the depreciation and fall in the value of the currency because of a very tight monetary policy that is being followed in the developed world. Change in the valuation as far as currency is concerned, which has had an impact on the external sector for developing countries. Also, the consequence as far as inflation is concerned, Controlling these inflationary forces has become a very important factor for all countries today, I mean, that is the kind of buildup that we are looking at as far as individual countries are concerned, the global conditions are concerned. And we know that all of this has made the importance of the region very, very apparent to us, because of, to a certain extent, the weakening as far as the multilateral institution is concerned in the first place. And the second fact, that now you have increasingly more and more countries, wanting to come together on the regional front in order to be able to cater to the needs that have arisen as a consequence of these two unforeseen events, pandemic and the cumulative impact of the Ukraine crisis, given the pandemic, Now, what do we see particularly important as far as South Asia is concerned is the impact of all of this on some aspects, that are absolutely basic, both to the economy as well as to the livelihood, as far as people are concerned. We saw, in terms of the pandemic, we saw the biggest impact as far as the informal sector is concerned, which happens to be very large as far as the, the South Asian economies are concerned, the impact on labor, migrant labor, and the impact on the informal sector, which diminished to a large extent because of the pandemic, and hasn't as yet seen a revival, The first consequence that we see as being the biggest and huge as far as South Asia is concerned. The second impact being in terms of, as far as, as far as South Asia is concerned, is in terms of employment, A large number of people who were rendered unemployed because of the shrinkages that we saw in the informal sector, because of the large-scale closures, border closures, the lockdowns that happened in the economies as waves of the pandemic impacted these economies in South Asia, So increased unemployment that has been seen, shrinking of the major sector of absorption of migrant labor, the informal sector, and both of these to a very large extent impacting the female labor force, that is women in the region being particularly impacted. A third aspect that's also very significant as far as the pandemic is concerned and the consequences of these events is in terms of the, the reversal as far as the poverty developments are concerned in the region in the last 2.5 decades. With good growth, this region had also seen a reduction in the number of poor people or people below the poverty line, That to a large extent got eroded with the pandemic, and also as a consequence of the inflationary impact of the Ukraine crisis, So we are looking at an increasing number of people who have slipped below the poverty line as a consequence of these two crisis events, that have been unforeseen and unpredictable, both in terms of length of time as well as in terms of the intensity of impact, A third concern, that we've also seen as very significant, because we are talking about fuel inflation, we are talking about fertilizer availability as a consequence of the developments that we have seen in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, impacting the agricultural sector and agricultural production in South Asia, So all of this has really meant, that in particular, in addition to the kind of implications that we see in the rest of the world, there has been certain specific impact, that has been more severe, that has been more sector specific, that has touched upon the livelihoods as far as individuals are concerned, and that has an impact on a larger number of people because of the informality as far as the occupation of large-scale occupation of many in South Asia is concerned, Given all of this, and given the fact, that post-Ukraine crisis, we are looking increasingly at what is being called around the world as friendshoring and ally shoring in the reorganization of supply chains around the world. We are looking increasingly at large firms trying to come together in regions closer to each other, proximate regions with friends, That is, friends are coming together, or friendly nations are coming together to form their own supply chains so that they build a certain resilient production structure in order to be able to face or combat or confront any such events in the future, That is, building resilience in future, or building economic resilience through coming together of friends and friendly nations, ally nations, has become very, very significant development in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, which has come upon which has followed the pandemic, So cumulative impact has been in terms of greater regionalization, greater regionalism around the world, When we look at South Asia, do we also see a possibility of greater regionalism in South Asia post-pandemic? Well, it's difficult to say whether we will be able to see greater regionalism or not, but the need of the hour is that this region, this region come together to be able to build its own economic resilience, just like the other regions are attempting to do. So it's very important, that as far as South Asia is concerned, South Asia at this time look at 3 or 4 things, And these 3 or 4 things, which I'd like to kind of list for us, for discussion, maybe this can also be brought in later, is that what is it that South Asia should be doing? One is the possibility of South Asia trying to build its own supply chains, I mean, if you look at any of the other regions, whether we look at North America, whether we look at the European Union, we look at Southeast Asia, all of these countries, have really built their efforts or really built the economic integration processes in their regions on the basis of supply chain integration. They have formed cooperative arrangements, trading sector-specific cooperative arrangements that have helped production to be aligned among the economies of a region, and successfully so. Whether that has been in the sectors like automobiles or electronics, or even as far as textiles and clothing is concerned. For us, therefore, in South Asia, in order to be able to build our own resilience, it's very important that we also be able to identify opportunities for the region in order to have certain supply chain possibilities. Textiles and clothing, of course, which has always been a possibility in South Asia, which has always been an inherent comparative advantage of South Asian economies. And, within textiles and clothing, we are able to see several complementarities if we work out these comparative advantage at a detailed level, So I think one of the important elements or one of the important steps that South Asia needs to work towards in terms of its economic integration post the pandemic, is to work towards building a textiles and clothing or sector-specific supply chains that will help it build resilience. Textiles and clothing is one example. The other example that I always find, very, very, in fact, specific to South Asia, and that can be very easily done in South Asia. I think South Asia has a great amount of potential for that, is in terms of a tourism supply chain, where you can have different countries, not only do we have tourism corridors, potential for tourism corridors in South Asia, whether they be in terms of heritage sites, whether they be in terms of religious tourism corridors, or just in terms of, scenery or scenic places, corridors that we are able to build, But in addition to these, in terms of the possibilities of visiting sites by tourists, there's also a possibility of having an airlines hub in South Asia, possibly in India, travel agencies from Nepal, workforce as far as guides, etc., are concerned from these regions, so that we are able to build a connected region, in terms of what is of very high potential in South Asia in terms of tourism, And an important aspect of development towards this, would be to have, in the first place, the possibility of easy mobility across the region. Issues of connectivity that need to be built, issues of connectivity, whether that be in terms of road, rail, or air. I think greater connectivity is the second important or fundamentally important aspect that needs to be discussed and talked about in the region to be able to see tourism corridors and tourism development, tourism value chains develop in the region. I think that's a very high potential region that we should be talking about and should be thinking about, and towards that, working towards transport connectivity in the region, way beyond what we are talking about at a sub-regional level at present in terms of the BBIN. But I think at the South Asian level, if we can start talking about these and identifying the tourism corridors, that will take the region forward to a very great extent, A third thing, that I wish we would do, is, or I see the region move, the possibility of the region developing, is cooperation in the agricultural sector, Again, something that's very, very significant for the region, because of the large scale population that is dependent on the agricultural sector in terms of its livelihood, incomes, employment, occupation, habitat, we see 60 to 65% of the population in South Asia residing in the agricultural sector, seeking employment from the agricultural sector. I think it's very important, therefore, that we put our heads together in the region post-pandemic, particularly given the cumulative impact of inflation, food, fuel inflation, difficulties, scarcity as far as fertilizers are concerned, etc., in being able to build a regional agricultural fund, Now that fund, whether we want to revive the old SARC, the existing SARC institutional structures in this context, in terms of the seed bank and the food bank that we have in the region, or we want to build a fresh, not just in terms of seed and food bank, but I feel it's important to bring in the new age aspects as far as agriculture is concerned, where we must start taking into account also the scope that the climate change and green transition is allowing us to bring in, the impact of rising temperatures as far as agricultural sector is concerned, crop yields are concerned, how the agricultural sector transition, the green transition requires changes in agriculture and manufacturing in the region. For all of that, I think we need to have a fund both in terms of finance as well as technology in the region. I think combining agricultural research with climate change research, climate change funds, transition finance as far as climate change is concerned, will go a long way in building capability of the region to be able to combat both climate change as well as its implications that are being seen in terms of, unforeseen floods, storms, landslides, scarcities as far as water is concerned because of melting glaciers, impact as far as disease and epidemics is concerned, submergence as far as coastal lands are concerned, habitation on the coastal lands, occupation of, the communities on the coastal lands. All of that, I think, needs to be integrated into one whole for the region to get down to thinking as to how we must take this forward to be able to confront the challenges that are, in a way, highly cumulative today globally and specifically for South Asia, given its base in terms of greater reliance on the agricultural sector, greater reliance also, of a larger number of people on the agricultural sector, and these slippages that have occurred of people below the poverty line post-pandemic, In the overall context, therefore, I see, that as far as the post-pandemic situation or the regional context is concerned, the impact of the pandemic, the Ukraine crisis, the climate change negotiations that we've seen, which have gone only so far as building the fund or contributing to the fund to be able to combat the implications of climate change are concerned. Regions need to be able to do things on their own, That is, we need to help ourselves. We need to be able to really build regional institutions for ourselves to be able to take certain new ideas forward, So my main propositions in this context, as I said earlier, are one in terms of thinking about economic resilience within the region by building regional supply chains, some in what is our inherently given comparative advantage in textiles and clothing, but also go beyond that to think of newer ways to be able to build new kinds of value chains, particularly where potential exists in huge, to a very large extent in the tourism sector, And the second thing that I wish to propose, because of the importance of the agricultural sector and the crisis that is emerging on top of the pandemic and Ukraine crisis that the climate change is imposing on the region, is the development of a fund, both in terms of finance as well as technology, for change in the agricultural sector, to uplift the agricultural sector so as to be able to meet the consequences, that is, not just be able to confront the consequences of the pandemic and the Ukraine crisis, but also to be able to build a base for what we are in for in terms of the adverse implications of the climate change, And I say this last bit also because, as far as climate change and its adverse implications are concerned, it's a challenge that's common to all in the region. No country in the region is better placed than the other, or no country is relatively worse off than the other. I think the entire set of countries in South Asia face the same challenge as far as climate change is concerned. And given the limitations of the developed world to come forward, as far as building technology, sharing technology, transfer of technology, or building a fund for technology transfer is concerned, we must be able to do it, A, on our own, and B, one, of course, we do it on our own, whether we do it through the existing regional institution, SARC, or we think afresh of the initiatives that we need to take. But two, also very significantly, I feel, in this context, is the necessity for the region to cooperate as a coalition in international negotiations and be able to put forward the idea of South Asia and the requirements or the needs of South Asia on the international forum in future climate change negotiations. I think it's very, very important to present a common front and build on a common platform as far as climate change and its consequences are concerned. So all of these imperatives globally, those that have been developing for some time, such as climate change, those that have come out of nowhere, pandemic and Ukraine crisis, today creates the imperative for renewed efforts towards regional economic integration in South Asia. I'll stop here and get into details of this wherever there is interest or questions. Thank you.
Professor Batra, thank you so much for the comprehensive and interesting lecture on post-COVID-19 regional economic integration in South Asia. We all learned a lot, and we have also received some questions. So I will put at least two questions at once, and then we will discuss about this. The questions I received is like, at the present situation, after the post-COVID, what are the obstacles to regional integration in South Asia, especially within the SARC countries, within eight SARC countries? So that's the one questions I have got from Alka Chaudhary. And the another question is, how do you see the current supply chain status within South Asian countries, as you have already mentioned the supply chain thing? So let's see first these two questions and then we will see others.
Obstacle to economic integration, cooperation in South Asia. You see, I mean, I can sit here the whole day, 2 days, 4 days and talk about the obstacles, Also, I think, I don't want to be, I don't want us to get caught in what are the obstacles. These are known. Some of them are known in the sense of the political conditions, that have existed for some time between some countries or largely in the region. Let's say the geopolitical, that's one. The other is the geopolitical context that has also evolved in the last few years, where we've seen other countries trying to increase their footprint in the region, rightly or wrongly, We've also seen, in the larger context to see as far as the region is concerned, in terms of moving away from all of this towards sub-regional cooperation and trying to make the effort to build upon those smaller initiatives, That's one part of it. The other part of it, which is more hands-on on the ground where we can make quick progress, because as far as the geopolitical and political context is concerned, let's say, that's been there for long. We haven't really been able to overcome it to a very significant extent. We've tried by sub-regionalism, it still continues. We can have alternative forums, etc. But what's more important, for example, for trade is the aspects of trade facilitation, for example. Why don't we start looking at how is it that we can facilitate trade and the movement of commodities within the region at the border? There are so many, procedures at the borders that continue to be very, very dated in comparison with, if you look at, the next door region, Southeast Asia, electronic data interchange, for example, passage of data. If a truck is starting, let's say, from Nepal for products in India, then at the starting point, at that point of time, the information of what is the consignment should be you relay to electronically to the Indian point, customs checkpoint. You don't need to come here, fill up, open, check, etc. Let there be electronic scanning also of the consignment, Let there be certain standards that can be developed, as far as transport vehicles are concerned, so that you don't have to offload, unload on the, different countries' transport vehicles, So these labs for testings, as far as consignments are concerned, long rows of trucks that we've been talking about, I think forever, as far as the Siliguri corridor is concerned. Connectivity among the economies in South Asia, how do we build that connectivity? How do we build multimodal vehicular, ease that multimodal vehicular movement, all of these, therefore, on the ground, I think the trade facilitation initiatives, if that can be the first attempt that we do, one. Two, the second, in terms of increasing connectivity, connectivity in terms of physical infrastructure, as well as, I feel, greater people-to-people connectivity, And, when I say people-to-people connectivity, I think a little beyond just cultural similarities, not just us celebrating each other's festivals, etc., which is fine. You have cultural festivals, etc., but also the importance of putting our heads together in terms of intellectual connectivity. Let's put our heads together to work out on a common platform, in terms of ideas of taking economic integration forward, small initiatives, but those that can really work on the ground, Some of us have been in the field for so long. Many of us have done field work here, We're familiar with the on-the-ground situation. So those of us, who are more into the economics of the region, and care more about how to increase trade, why don't we just take the idea of economic integration by putting our heads together? Let's connect the intellectuals of the region, Let's have an ideas lab, Let's experiment in terms of what we think and create opportunities for ourselves, In that sense, I think all of these, in terms of supply chains, for example, I mean, tourism is one example that I'm giving, but I think if we sit together, maybe we can come together, come up with certain other possibilities for connecting supply chains within the region, given the knowledge that each one of us will come, in terms of on the ground knowledge of their countries, How do we connect those, put those together? I think these are important things that we should start doing because the obstacles have been known to us for very long now. It's need not focus on that. Focus on what we can do. The second question, which was on supply chains, was it? What was it? Supply chains I've kind of talked about enough, so I don't think I need to answer that question. The other is, the erosion of multilateral forums has led to the, okay, maybe you, Sunil, you can pick up the questions and tell me. Yeah. You're on mute, I think, Sunil. I can't hear you.
Yeah, okay. Yes. The question is from Neil Singh. He has asked that the fact that the erosion of multilateral forum has led to the coming of age of regional forums in the terms of increased cooperation and integration. So is it not a blessing in disguise for the developing world, as they can now switch to their own indigenous ways of tackling issues like trade, terrorism, infrastructure development, disaster management, and people-to-people connect and other areas of cooperations?
Well, I agree with you on one part, that indigenous ways. As I said, it's important for us to have an intellectual connectivity, Let's bring the intellect of the region together. But I don't necessarily agree with you when you say that the decline of multilateral gives us this opportunity. The indigenous coming together, we've always had that opportunity. Multilateral forums being there doesn't stop us from meeting on the regional forums and taking our ideas forward, Multilateralism is, in a way, it works better for developing and lesser developed economies because it allows them to come together with their like strength economies and represent themselves or their interests on a global forum, So the multilateral has its own advantage of giving you a larger platform, both to coalesce with others, that is, form coalitions with others who are similar in economic strength, terms, and scale, also to be able to give you a platform that's global in nature. And you can always supplement that with regional, bilateral, So multi-layered diplomacy, multi-layered economic diplomacy has always worked, and we should not think one is vis-a-vis the other or one is a substitute of the other. They can all supplement each other.
Yeah. And the next question is from Sandrika Pandit. The question is, how do you see possibility of cooperation in energy sector, particularly in hydropower?
Well, energy, again, is something that's very, very critical. Energy shortage is something that's been very critical as far as manufacturing sector development in this region is concerned. And I'd like to, in the sense, I have always been for energy sector cooperation, hydropower, great resources available in the region, But again, we've also known the kind of problems that we've had in the region as far as hydropower projects and water sharing arrangements in the region are concerned, whether it's issues of sovereignty, whether it's issues of domestic politics, whether it's issues of structures as far as, those constructed on the rivers are concerned. All of these have arisen from time to time. In addition to that, I think is the other important aspect, again, moving away from what may be just purely domestic politics or political bilateral relations, etc., to the core of the sector, which is in terms of, the requirements as far as power trade is concerned. Domestic reforms in each country to be able to build a power market for power trade to happen, I think those are, very important as far as individual countries are concerned, so that power trade can happen and we can start building further on cooperation in this region. We've seen some trade happening now between, I think, India, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, all of this is happening. So for that to be taken forward, I think a greater amount of domestic power sector reforms in individual countries are also equally important,
Thank you, ma'am. We'll have next question from Seema Kumari. What are the steps that South Asian region can take to economically reintegrate the returning migrant workers, especially female migrant workers, given the challenging aspect of economic reintegration associated with social reintegration of female migrant workers?
We've been kind of discussing this aspect in recent times, that is as far as the gender implications of the pandemic are concerned, and particularly the loss as far as women are concerned, whether it's been education, whether it's been their occupations, domestic situations are concerned. I think women have been the biggest sufferers, along with children, losing out on education and 2 years of education, etc., or falling out of school, education system, basically. One means that we've been thinking about has been trade, and trade in terms of border communities, border hearts, etc., which may be possible for women to be, women entrepreneurs, for example. A little more formal would be women entrepreneurs. The other would be women as far as border communities are concerned, and building certain kind of structures at the borders to facilitate products that are, both produced by women as well as can be sold by women as far as border hearts are concerned, there is a certain effort to also make the possibility of movement within the region in terms of commodities or women entrepreneurs, trading for women, through women-oriented trade facilitation measures, that can be taken in order to be able to bring them back to some kind of economic activity, which they can do from home, but at the same time can take to a larger scale if they are able to do that, So I think to a certain extent, being able to assimilate, the fact that a lot of women may have moved out of the formal workforce. Sorry, just one second. So, to be able to bring them back to a certain extent through trade is something that a lot of thought is going into, That's something that I would also be, suggest as one possibility within the region, to be able to do that,
Thank you, ma'am. The next question I have got from Nisha. The question is, as it seems that SAARC is in coma, and at the time when SAARC and SAFTA are not functional, do you see any other framework or mechanism for regional trade and economic integration through BIMSTEC or some other form?
I mean, BIMSTEC doesn't have, for that matter, an FTA. That's one part of it, Two, yes, SAFTA has not worked. After that, SAFTA has had a very limited effectiveness in the region. As I said, we know the reasons, we know the context that we operate in South Asia, So as I've said, my alternatives, yes, as I also mentioned earlier, sub-regional forums are a possibility. We've been working on this, whether it be BBIN or it be in terms of BIMSTEC, which is connecting South Asia with Southeast Asia. I see a lot of potential in connecting South Asia with Southeast Asia, the possibility, because South Asia is hugely advanced as far as their economic integration process is concerned. Institutions are concerned, If we can, but we'll have to kind of raise ourselves to a certain level to be able to institutionally integrate with Southeast Asia in that sense, because we are still not able to develop our own institutions, SAFTA, we see very, very limited effectiveness, We see very limited tariff liberalization of tradable commodities in the region through SAFTA, So in that sense, I would, for South Asia, say, again, as I've said earlier, important is to bring people together here to think of new ways of connecting with each other, and thinking of newer ways to bring about economic integration in the region. Remember that in ASEAN, for example, it was not to begin with the ASEAN Free Trade Area Agreement that brought the countries together. It was the production networks that happened on account of, foreign investment moving in the region from Japan to other countries, etc. The connection among countries, or the connectivity among countries in the economic terms, happened through the market. In this case, we are not at the same level of market also as far as South Asia is concerned. Market levels, developments differ. Developmental levels differ in South Asia, So there is a big need of on-the-ground initiatives to be taken, I feel, by people, If we have the political will to support the people initiative, and as I said, here people I see in terms of the intellectual capital in the region. Each one comes with knowledge about their own region, the biggest problems, So if we have that connectivity in the region, I think we can come up with initiatives that can work. And I feel in South Asia, we really need to start with small to big, We've been, kind of with the big for a very long time. SAARC, SAFTA. These have not worked, accept. So we need to work with smaller initiatives, not very small initiatives, but we need to work with, sector-specific, maybe, sector-specific initiatives, I would say, with intellectual capital connecting across the region to make that possible, given the political support or political will also as fundamental requirement in the region.
Thank you, ma'am. We will take the last question here. As we know that India being the largest economy in the region, so is regional integration still relevant for India in the South Asia, and what are the possible role of India in this aspect?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question? I didn't get it, sorry.
Yeah, the question is, India being the largest economy in the region, so what are the possible role that India can play for regional economic integration, and how the regional economic integration is relevant to India?
It's very relevant to India because I think prosperity around is cumulative for us. Prosperity means stability and prosperity together go together to establish greater peace. So I think peace for all, greater prosperity for all, greater happiness for all, it's all positive for the region. It's all positive also for the largest economy in the region, So the largest economy has an equal amount of interest and investment in the region's happiness and broader prosperity, It's not to be seen as an individual attempt, or an individual motivation, I think the motivation should be regional, is regional. The consequences are positive for all. They would benefit India equally, if all countries around us are prosperous. India, yes, needs to be both the leader as well as the guiding force here, given its largeness in the region. Magnanimity in terms of non-reciprocity, I think something that India has been practicing. If we look at our FTA with Sri Lanka or a relationship with Bhutan in that sense, improved relations, how they are leading to bilateral initiatives between India and Bangladesh, So I feel India has a role to play, definitely. India has an interest, definitely, in seeing the region prosper. And the outcomes will be collective and beneficial to all, As I said, the will has to be both on the ground, both as far as political will is concerned, as well as people's will is concerned, to see South Asia or to think of South Asia as a region, I think that's the foremost requirement, that we be able to imagine this region as an integrated region and then start working towards it, both in terms of us, as people who are interested in taking this idea forward with the right kind of political support. So I think everybody is equally invested in looking at the region prosper.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Professor Batra, for the insightful presentation. It was a great session. We will end our session here. We would also like to thank our participants and audience for their wonderful questions. And we still have some questions, but due to time constraint, we will not take them. So have a nice day, and wish to you have all in our next sessions. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. And thank you again. It was a pleasure for me. Thank you also for these very nice questions. I hope some are answered, and I hope this also initiates every one of you to think more on regional integration, economic integration in South Asia. Thank you.
Sure, it will. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.